Hey, good morning and welcome to Mount Pisgah Church. We're glad that you've joined us today. Today we're in the third part of the message, Moses Points to Jesus. In the series, Moses, Jesus, and the Last Days. We're going to look today particularly at some of the things that God factored in to the Torah, to the law, and to Israel's journey with him. It really has been all about faith all along. And we're going to see how that's all through the Torah. If you're ever in the Mount Pisgah area, we meet at 1288 Mount Pisgah Church Road, Apex, North Carolina at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. If you have any prayer needs, please feel free to put them down in the comment section below. Thanks for joining us again, and may the joy of the Lord be your strength. Would open up your Bibles to Genesis chapter 2. Genesis 2. We are continuing to talk about finding Jesus throughout the law, the prophets, and the writings as he had spoken to his disciples and emphasized so many times that he was revealed in the Scriptures. Everything he would come and do, who he is, all about him, and it has been there all along, and how the law and the prophets pointed to his sufferings, his coming, his resurrection, his glorification, and his rule over all creation. And over the last few weeks, we have seen, when we looked at the first section of this in Moses pointing to Jesus, remember when we talk about the Torah, we're talking about the first 5 books of the Bible, plain and simple. When we talk about the law, that's contained inside the Torah. A lot of times when Christians hear the term Torah, they automatically think that's the law, but it's not. The law is contained in the Torah, and it starts at Exodus in the 19th chapter and goes through about Numbers chapter 10. Where we have the law really spelled out. And of course, the book of Deuteronomy is basically Moses rehearsing that back to Israel and teaching them and making some commentary on it for them before they get ready to enter into the promised land. And in the Torah, Jesus, again, as I said, is revealed. And we saw that he was revealed in Adam. He was revealed in the principle of the garden, Adam being the first king, the first priest. God created man to be in union with him, to partake and to eat of and take of his life, his eternal life, which was symbolized there by the tree of life that was placed in that garden. And all of those things were pointing to Jesus. We saw last week about the promises and the patterns and the prophecies in the Torah that are pointing to Jesus and revealing him and his work in every way. It's amazing. I mean, it's just, even this morning, as I was reading through in the book of Deuteronomy, in my devotions, just seeing how so many things that were spoken of there reiterated again in the new covenant, and the apostles talking about them and quoting some of these passages and Jesus quoting them, even as something as simple as you couldn't accuse anybody without the witness of 2 or 3 individuals, and that God would only confirm something judgment-wise against someone that they had broken the law in the presence of 2 or 3 witnesses. And then you go over to the new covenant, and Jesus teaching, he says, where 2 or 3 are gathered together, there am I in their midst. We always automatically think about, well, whenever Christians get together to worship, that's what he's talking about. But no, it's in the context of disciplining someone who has sinned. And the witnesses, 2 or 3, are coming together to bear witness of the fact that they have sinned. A brother has sinned, and there Jesus is in the midst to confirm their witness about this person's sin and what actions need to be taken. It's quoting directly. Jesus again said, I did not come to destroy the law. I didn't come to destroy it. I came to fulfill it. I am the goal. I am everything that the law is pointing to. I think when we were on Wednesday evenings watching the series The Chosen, remember one of the episodes that was one of the main big times when he was in Nazareth, when they were talking about the Torah of Moses, and he stood up and he said, I am the Torah of Moses. I am that. I'm fleshing it out. And this is what it is all pointing to. And so the scriptures become a very living book to us when we begin to find Jesus is all throughout it. One of the things that is interesting has to do with this whole concept of God creating and putting man in a special place, man falling and sinning, and God then providing a way of salvation for him and a promised hope of salvation for him, then picking a nation to be his people, who in turn sin against him, are kicked out of the land, and God providing a way of redemption and salvation and promising that to them as well. One of the things that we find out in this whole narrative, in this whole story throughout the Old Testament, is that from the very beginning, God factored in the fall. He factored it into his plans and his purposes. He factored in Adam's fall. He factored in Israel's fall. And it has always been and was always intended to be, in a relationship with him, an issue of trust and faith, not obedience to a law in order to be made right with him. It was always about trusting him. And when we see in Genesis chapter 2, down in verse 16, it says, "Then the Lord God, Adonai, Elohim, commanded the man, saying, from all the trees of the garden you may most freely eat. You're welcome to eat them. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you must not eat. For when you eat of it, you must assuredly die." You will surely die. Death will come in to the creation. This is one of the biggest questions that people have when it comes to God's plans and purposes, and it has to do with free will. And it's obvious that when God put Adam and Eve there in that garden, he gave them a free will to make a choice. God did not force their hand. It's obvious here. He says that when he put these trees there, notice what he says, "Of every tree in this garden, you may freely eat." It's your choice. I'm not going to force you to eat it. I'm not going to keep you from, none of it. It's your choice. But now here's a tree, don't eat from it. But again, you have a choice of whether to eat of it or not. This whole idea of free will and choice and so forth is a big question for people there, because they're like, well, if God is so good and if God is so powerful and all of these things, why is there evil? Why did he permit evil? Is he the cause of evil? And obviously the answer is no, he's not the cause of evil. He cannot do evil. He has given to humanity, each one of us, he even gave it to the angels, free will. To make a choice, to decide to follow him, to decide to live in obedience and in relationship with him, or not to do so. It is something that is imperative when it comes to a relationship of love. Love demands that free will exists. God is never going to force anyone to love him against their desire. Never going to do that. He's not going to twist their arm. He's not going to make them choose to love him. And God does not force his love on anyone at all. That choice is left up to the individual. Free will is one of the greatest gifts God has ever given to us. But it comes with a great deal of responsibility. But it is a tremendous gift. You see, God is all-wise. And the fact is, he knows everything before it happens. Scripture makes it clear. He knows the end from the beginning. He knows every choice we're going to make. He knows every decision we're going to make. Did he know Adam was going to fall before he ever created Adam? Yeah. Did he know that when he made the angels and created them that the adversary was going to rebel? Yeah, he knew that. Nothing. Did he know how men were going to treat him when he would come in flesh? Yes, he exactly knew. But see, prior knowledge of something before it happens does not equal causing it to happen. Just because you know something is going to take place beforehand doesn't mean you're the cause of it. One of the things that when Denise and I started dating, one of the first places we went to eat was a seafood place. I love seafood. I love shrimp. I love fried shrimp. So we went to eat. Well, come to find out, when we sat down in the restaurant, I discovered she hates seafood. She hates shrimp especially. She doesn't like all that chewy, rubbery, texture to it. She can't stand it. Well, I discovered that night. From that time forward, if we ever went somewhere, we were at the beach or something, and we were ordering seafood, I always made sure that when we were ordering something, and if she wasn't at the table, I would know she would want chicken or something like that, always without shrimp. Now, because I would order that without shrimp, that doesn't mean that I caused her not to eat shrimp. But I knew beforehand her choice would be, I don't want this. It's simply, I made a decision to do something, but it didn't cause her to make the choice to reject the shrimp or not want it. God knows all of the decisions we're going to make, and God has factored in. You can just imagine, when you're in a given situation, the multiplicity of choices you can make in a given moment over a given issue, and the possibilities that exist. Numerically, a mathematician will sit down and give you all kinds of, almost to the infinitude of all the possible things that could happen in this situation and circumstance. If you do this will happen. If you don't do this will happen. God knows all that and has factored it all in. But because he knows all of that, he's factored it all in, it doesn't mean that he's causing that to happen. And this is where people have a big issue with God's power and authority, and they question God as to really whether or not he's really good, because evil exists. It's not that God caused evil. God permitted it because God allowed the beings who are doing the evil to choose it. But here's the thing that proves God's good. Death came into the world through Adam's sin. He knew Adam was going to do that, but God has provided a way to overcome that. He's provided a way of escape to conquer death and sin. It demonstrates he really is good, because he's not going to leave the world in that condition. Provided salvation through Jesus. When we look at this whole process of Moses and all of this pointing to Jesus, you see Adam being created, Adam falls. God rescues him, saves him, provides covering for him. And then, of course, he gives a promise to him of a coming Redeemer. Now, Adam is cast out of the garden, and as we talked about last week, he goes to the east. His progeny starts populating, moving to the east, eventually ending up in Babylon. Israel is the same way. Israel is brought in by God as his people. He brings them. Israel sins. She falls. God rescues her over and over again, redeeming her, and then gives her a promise of a coming Redeemer, especially in the prophet Jeremiah chapters 30 through chapters 33. He's giving them all kinds of promises concerning a future covenant and something that he's going to do. But then Israel is cast out of the land, and she is taken to the east, to Babylon. Israel mirrored Adam in every way in his sin and in his disobedience. Even the prophet Hosea said that in Hosea 6:7, but like Adam, they transgressed the covenant. There they dealt faithlessly with me. Unbelief. They didn't trust me in the covenant. Adam and Eve were blessed by God when he put them in the garden. And they were blessed particularly to be fruitful and what? Multiply. To grow and to fill the land and conquer the land. They're cast out. God brings a people in. He picks a man named Abraham, and he chooses him, and he's going to, through him, bless all the nations of the earth, and he's going to bring a people out of Abraham that we know as the Hebrew people, the Jewish people. Abraham has Isaac, Isaac has Jacob, Jacob has 12 sons, and those 12 sons and Jacob, eventually the 70 of them, end up in the land of Egypt under Joseph's care, and there they are for over 400 years. In that place of Egypt, the people grow exponentially. Phenomenal growth takes place in the nation of Israel in Egypt. And it's like, again, they are fulfilling the mandate to be fruitful and multiply. God is blessing them in every way. They increased greatly, and they became so exceedingly strong that Pharaoh was terrified of them because at how rapidly they were growing and filling the land, and Exodus 1:7 tells us. And that is a result of God's promised blessing to Abraham's seed. He had made a promise to him that he would make his seed like the sand of the sea. Look up at the stars, Abraham, and this is what I'm going to do with your people. I'm going to bless them like that. In Genesis 18:18 is what God told him, that in his seed he would grow, he would become a mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth would be blessed. And then God takes this little family of 70 people in Egypt, and he turns them into a mighty and powerful nation outside of the land of Israel. Outside of it. And then he's going to take them and put them in it. You know what's interesting? Do you know where Adam was created? He wasn't created in the garden. He was created outside of the garden. And Genesis chapter 2 verse 15 says, "And the Lord God took Adam and put him in the garden," in the land. He was outside of it created, and then God placed him in the place of promise, a place of beauty, a place of fruitfulness, a place of lush, ravishing kinds of beauty. Israel is created by God outside the land of Egypt, in the land of Egypt, outside the land, and the land is waiting for her, and God takes Israel, leads her out of Egypt, and places her in the land. In fact, in two different places in the book of Deuteronomy and in the book of Joshua, when it talks about the Israel going in to possess the land, is the exact same word in the Hebrew that's used in Genesis 2:15 about God placing Adam in the garden. It's not by coincidence. They are placed in the land by the Lord and bringing them into that place of promise. But here's the thing. With Adam, with Abraham, with all of those, with the nation of Israel, it has always, by God's design, it was always to be about faith and trust in Him from the very beginning. Not about obedience to a bunch of commands to have a relationship with Him. It's always been about faith. It's never changed. A lot of people think, oh, in the Old Testament, under the law, it was about obeying commandments to get right with God. Obedience would bring blessing, as God said. Disobedience would bring curses. But God never said anything about obey this and you'll have a relationship with me. It was always about trust and faith. And we find this, if you go to Genesis chapter 15, this is the first place where it's really emphasized about faith in Genesis 15 and how a person would be made right with God. And it was never about obeying the law. Never. In Genesis 15, it says, after those things, verse 1, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, do not fear, Abram, I am your shield and your very great reward. But Abram said, my Lord, Adonai, what will you give me, since I'm living without children, and the heir of my household is Eliezer of Damascus? Then Abram said, look, you've given me no seed, so a houseborn servant is my heir. Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this one will not be your heir, but in fact, one who will come from your own body will be your heir. And he took him outside and said, look up now at the sky. Look at the stars and count the stars. And if you're able to count them, then he said to him, so shall your seed be. Then Abram, then he did what? He believed. He believed Adonai. And he, the Lord, reckoned it to him as what? Righteousness. He trusted. And because he trusted, God declared him righteous before him. Not because Abraham did anything as far as keeping any law. He trusted God. And God counted it as righteousness. This is repeated throughout the Torah. When you look, you don't have to turn these passages, Exodus 4:31, when Moses first shows up and Aaron first shows up to Egypt and begins to do these signs and wonders in front of the Israelites, then Moses and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of the sons of Israel, and Aaron spoke all these words which the Lord had spoken to Moses, and Moses then performed these signs in the sight of the people. So the people believed. They believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about the sons of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, then they bowed down and worshiped. They believed. When they were delivered by God in Exodus 14, verses 30 and 31, it says, thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. And when Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and the people believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Notice this is Exodus 14 prior to the law. They believed. They trusted. Exodus 19, 8 and 9, when they're at the base of Mount Sinai, it says, all the people answered together and said, when the Lord gave them these, so this is what I'm going to share with you. All the people answered and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will come to you in a thick cloud so that the people may hear when I speak with you and may also believe in you forever. Then Moses told the words of the Lord to the people. Deuteronomy 1:30 and 33 says, the Lord your God who goes before you will himself fight on your behalf, just as he did for you in Egypt before your eyes and in the wilderness when you saw the Lord your God carried you, just as a man carries his son, in all the way which you have walked until you come to this place. But, now notice the shift here, but for all of this, you did not trust the Lord your God, who goes before you on your way to seek out a place for you to encamp in fire by night, cloud by day, to show you the way in which you should go. Then he rehearses it again in Deuteronomy 9:23. When the Lord sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, go up and possess the land which I've given you, then you rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. You neither believed him nor listened to his voice. Something happens after Exodus chapter 19 and verse 9, where you have this whole concept of faith and belief. Then after Exodus 19 and the law is given, Israel starts doubting. She stops trusting and believing. And her doubting and her unbelief cost her every single time there were consequences to her unbelief. It cost her greatly. You see, the goal of the Torah, Jesus said, is not the law. Everybody thinks that's the goal. That's what the first 5 books were written for, was all about that law. Remember, it's just a portion of it in the narrative, in the story. It wasn't. Christ is the goal of the Torah. He's what the Torah is pointing to. And if it was the law and obedience to God, why then did Moses spend so much time in the book of Deuteronomy, especially highlighting Israel's unbelief and death after the law was given? Why did he keep emphasizing, you're not trusting? You're not believing, and it's costing you. He wasn't emphasizing, keep the commandments. Oh, keep the commandments. Obey, obey, obey. No, he kept saying, you're not trusting. You're not believing. And it's costing you because you're not trusting and believing God. The Apostle Paul wrote in Romans 4:15, the law brings wrath. But where there is no law, there's no transgression. Isn't it interesting? And we'll emphasize this again in a minute. That prior to Exodus 19:9, before they got to Mount Sinai, Israel grumbled. Israel complained. Israel wanted to go back to Egypt. They were trying to get rebellions against Moses. And guess what? No consequences. But after Exodus 19, they did the exact same thing. And guess what happened? Judgment fell. Paul said, where there's no law, there's no transgression. Now, after the law is given, your grumbling and complaining is going to cost you. But prior to it, it didn't. It's like God just kind of overlooked it. Let it go because, again, there was no law. But now that the law is given, there's consequences to the actions. And he emphasizes, Paul did again in 2 Corinthians 3, verses 6 and 7. He actually says that the covenant of Sinai, the law, was a ministry of death. He says, not that we are adequate in ourselves to consider anything as coming from ourselves, but our adequacy is from God, who also made us adequate as servants of a new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. But if the ministry of death in letters that were engraved on stones came with glory, which there was great glory on the mountain, so that the sons of Israel could not look intently at the face of Moses because of the glory of his face, fading as it was, how would the ministry of the Spirit fail to be with even more glory? The whole book of Romans, really, that's, if you want a book of theology in the New Testament about all of this, it's the book of Romans. And when Paul is talking about all of this in the book of Romans in his letter to that church there, Paul speaks of two kinds of righteousness. He speaks of a righteousness that's based upon the law, and then he says there's a righteousness that's based upon faith and trust, which it's always been about. It wasn't ever about to be about a righteousness based on us keeping a bunch of commands. He says in Romans 10, 3 through 11, for not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. For Moses writes that the man who practices the righteousness which is based on law shall live by that righteousness. And he's quoting Leviticus 18:5 there. But the righteousness based on faith speaks as follows. Do not say in your heart, who will ascend to heaven? That is to bring Christ down. Or who will descend into the abyss? That is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. This is Paul writing to the Romans, and he's quoting Deuteronomy now, chapter 30, verse 14. And he says, it's in your mouth. It's in your heart. He says, that is the word of faith, which we're preaching. That if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart a person believes, resulting in righteousness. And with the mouth he confesses, resulting in salvation. For the scripture says, whoever believes in him will not be disappointed. When you go back in the Torah and you look at the story of the giving of the law, which starts at Exodus 19:1 and goes through Numbers chapter 10 and verse 10. That little section in the story, you're going to find two surprising things in that whole portion of the narrative. The first thing is this, that Israel's experience with God at Mount Sinai and him giving the law to them and the covenant does not achieve its stated purpose, which was to be from Israel a response of faith. Just trust me. Trust me. But it didn't achieve that. The law could not produce that kind of faith. The second thing is that Israel's transgression and her sin after the law is given always results in death. Immediate and swift consequences after the law is given. When she disobeyed, bam, she got hit with judgment. What God wanted from those people was the same thing Abraham gave him. All he wanted was for them to trust him, believe him, and follow him in faith, a faith response. And he acts, he does things for them so that they will trust him. Look, I do care for you. I'm giving you manna. Trust me. You thirsty? I'm giving you water from a rock. Trust me. You hungry for meat? I'll give you quail. Trust me. You need deliverance from your enemies. I'll part a sea and take you through it. I'll deliver you. I'll keep you. I'll provide for you. Trust me. Believe me. Believe my words to you, my promises to you. The interesting thing is, in those first 5 books in the Torah, the words faith and righteousness or right standing with God are mentioned together in the same sentence string only twice in the whole Torah. In Genesis 15, which we just read, Abraham believed, and it was counted to him by God for righteousness. He's in right standing with God. God declared him right before him because he believed God. And the other section is in Deuteronomy 9, but the flip side of it, where Moses is recounting Israel's history. Notice he says in Genesis, or Deuteronomy 9, verse 23, when the Lord sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, go up and possess the land which I've given you, you rebelled against the command of the Lord your God, neither you believed him, nor did you listen to his voice. Israel was not right with God because she did not trust him. No righteousness was given to her. Moses again says in Deuteronomy 9, 4 through 6, don't say in your heart when the Lord God has driven them out before you, when they've gone into the land and God's driven all their enemies out, don't say in your heart, because of my righteousness, the Lord has brought me in to possess the land. But it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is dispossessing them before you. It's not for your righteousness or for the uprightness of your heart that you're going in to possess their land. It's because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord your God is driving them out before you in order to confirm the oath which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Know then, it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord is God, your God, is giving you this land to possess it, because you're a stubborn people. Because you trust him. God's driving the people out of that land because of their wickedness, and he's keeping his promise that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob because they believed. And he's fulfilling his promise to them, his oath to them, not because of your goodness or your own righteousness. Faith in God's promise, faith in God's work on our behalf always resulted in and results in standing righteous before him. Trust. That's it. That's why Jesus, when he came, emphasized trust and belief. For God so loved the world, Jesus said, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but shall have everlasting life. Whoever trusts in him. Not keeps a bunch of rules. Not keeps the commandments or the law. It's not about that. It is about trusting God. It's always been about trusting God and believing in him. When you believe the good news, as Paul says, you and I then, when we believe that good news and we believe on Christ, we stand perfectly righteous before God. Not because of our own works, not because of anything we've done or our obedience to that. We just believed. We believed, we made the choice to believe, and all of the perfection and righteousness of Jesus is given to us. We're clothed with the robe of his righteousness. We stand perfectly, 100% as perfect before God as Jesus is. Because it's his righteousness that's given to us by faith, not by obedience. When you look at Adam, you have one man. The man who's the head of the whole human race. He is a priest before God, worshiping him and celebrating him. He is a king. He's been given authority to rule. He's been blessed by God to be fruitful. And God says, I'm going to give you seed, be fruitful and multiply. He's placed in a land. And he falls. Then God moves to Israel. And Israel as a nation. And a people now, a collective people whom God makes his own people, they are priests. They are kings. They are to rule. God gives them a land to subdue and to drive out the enemies there. And she falls. But then Messiah shows up. The Lord Jesus comes and takes on human flesh. He is a man who's now representing a new people, a new race, a new nation. And he is a king. He is a priest. He is blessed by his Father. He is promised seed, and he is promised an inheritance of the nations, the whole earth. He's promised. He doesn't fall. He obeys perfectly. He trusts his Father perfectly in our behalf, representing us and all of Israel, the perfect Israelite. He doesn't fall. And then from him, there is a new people called the body of Christ. The assembly of God now, church. And we are now, according to the Scripture, Jew and Gentile, a new nation, a people that God has called out to himself. And we are kings, we are priests, we have been blessed. Paul emphasizes that over and over. Where do you think this whole concept of blessings come from? Blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus. We have been blessed with an inheritance. All this is Torah talk. It's all Torah talk. The same principles. Blessing, seed, land, nations, it's all there. And Paul is extracting all that and saying, God has a bigger plan in the pictures back there. And it's all about Messiah. And then Messiah calling out a people. We are promised a land. Go into all the world and preach the good news. Because I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. Why are we going out? Because we are going out to enforce Psalm 2 and Psalm 110. Because the Father has promised to his Son the nations as his inheritance. And how is he going to claim his inheritance? He's going to claim his inheritance by his people going out and declaring his rule, his kingdom. And calling out people from every tribe, people, nation, and tongue to himself. And how are those people going to come in? Because we lay out a bunch of laws for them to keep in order to get right with God? We tell them to do what? Believe the good news. So that you will stand righteous before God. That's the way God always intended it to be. A faith relationship with him. It's always been about trust. From the very, very beginning. But it's a choice. Every one of us have to make that choice. Every one of us have to choose to believe. It's all been done for us, as we've talked about before. Christ has done it all. He's forgiven all sin. He's destroyed sin. He's conquered Satan. He has fulfilled the law. He's obeyed it all perfectly for us. He's taken the consequences of sin upon himself so that we don't have. He's done that for all the world, Paul said. But you don't experience the reality of those results until you believe. It's done for you whether you believe it or not, but you still have to believe. Just believe the good news and trust. And when you understand that, this beautiful gift of free will, and that God factored in the falls prior to anything ever happening, makes a huge difference in your own life. You see, because before you were ever created, before I was ever created, God factored in all my falls and all your falls before we ever came into this world. Before he ever sent Jesus to save us, he factored it all in. He knew the stumblings you would make, the bad ones. He knew the secrets that nobody else knows. The places that you would be terrified for anybody else to find out. The hidden skeletons in the closet. He factored all that in. And he pursued you because he loves you. And all he wants you to do is trust him. Believe. He factored in all of our falls. Now think about this. Look at all we would never know about God if it were not for our sin. Think about that. You and I would never know about his love that's unconditional. We'd never know about grace. We'd never know about mercy or forgiveness and a multitude of other things as well. Are you saying, Randy, are you saying we just need to go out and sin? No. But if it wasn't for sin, we wouldn't know any of those things. You wouldn't know what it's like to have the burden of sin you've committed taken off your shoulders by his grace if you hadn't sinned. You've never known it. See how smart and wise God is? He's factored it all in. And he knew beforehand sin's going to enter in. Was it his will that happened? No. But he understood and factored in the fact that when that does happen, now these people are going to get to see a whole different side of me. They're going to get to see how much I really do love them. How much I care for them. And when he factored in all of my falls and all of your falls as well, here's the beautiful thing about it. He wants us to factor in other people's falls too in our relationships with him. Isn't it interesting that when you and I blow it, we run, oh God, please forgive me. Please cleanse me. I'm sorry. But if somebody blows it against us, we hold it over their head. God doesn't want us to do that. He says, look, I factored in your falls. You need to factor in other people's falls too. This is why Paul told the Galatians in chapter 6, verse 1 and 2, brethren, if anyone is caught in a trespasses, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, each one looking to yourself so that you won't be tempted. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. What is the law of Christ? Love one another as I have loved you. And when he talks about bearing one another's burdens, we think about that just helping our brothers and sisters when they're having a rough time going through life. No, he just put it in the context about somebody falling in sin. Help them bear that burden. It's a burden. It's weighing them down. Factor in their falls and extend to them the same grace your Abba has extended to you. Extend to them the same mercy, the same kindness. This is why Paul told the Ephesians in Ephesians 4:32, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving each other just as God in Christ has forgiven you. Phew. Is that easy to do? No. But we got to learn to do it. Got to learn to do it. Because you see, this is how people are going to see our Father. This is going to how people are going to see Christ in us, is by us extending that same kind of grace and forgiveness and mercy to them. Believe me, sin brings its consequences. You and I don't have to pound the consequences to them. They know the consequences. They're living in them. Sin always brings death. It always brings pain. What they need now is the salve. They need the mercy and tender medicine of grace and compassion from our Father poured into them. Tullian Chibichian, who's a pastor at Sanctuary in Jupiter, Florida, says this. He said, Jesus moved toward those whom society moved away from. He refused to dismiss those who had been dismissed, reject those who had been rejected, denounce those who had been denounced, and shame those who had been shamed. That's the big difference between Jesus and cancel culture. While our culture, including the church, cancels people who have done terrible things, Jesus cancels the terrible things that people are canceled for. The sins and the scandals that cancel culture chooses not to forget, Jesus chooses not to remember. You can't love someone unless you know them. And you can't trust someone you don't love. Knowing leads to loving, and loving leads to trusting. This is the whole principle of walking with God. Get to know me. And as you get to know me, you will love me. And as you fall in love with me, you will learn to trust me. Because I can be depended upon. All come to me, all you that labor and are heavy laden. And I will give you rest. Throw the yoke of religion off. The yoke of your sins and the burden that you're bearing. Throw it off and take my yoke on you. And learn from me. For I'm meek and lowly in heart. I'm kind, I'm gentle. Get to know me. And you'll love me. And as you love me, you'll learn to trust me. It's all God wanted Adam to do. Get to know me, Adam. Get to know my heart. Who I am and what I'm like, and you will fall in love with me. And you'll trust me. Israel, get to know me. I want to show myself to you. Love me. Love me with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And you will learn to trust me. That's what it's all about. It's always been that way. It's always been about trust. And it doesn't have to be a perfect trust. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of like that guy in the story of Jesus when he had a son that needed healing. He's like, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. I trust, but I still struggle sometimes trusting like I should. Jesus says, all right, all you need is faith the size of a little mustard seed. That's it. Just a little mustard seed. I'll take care of the rest. Don't worry about it. Just trust me. I've used this quote before, and I close with it. Robert Capon, one of my favorite writers, he says, trust him. Trust him. And when you've done that, you are living the life of grace. No matter what happens to you in the course of that trusting, no matter how many waverings you may have, no matter how many suspicions that you have bought a poke with no pig in it, no matter how much heaviness and sadness, your lapses, your vices, your indispositions and bratty whining may cause you, you simply believe that somebody else, by his death and resurrection, has made it all right. And you just say thank you and shut up. The whole slop closet full of mildewed performances, which is all you and I have to offer, is simply your death. It is Jesus who is your life. If he refused to condemn you because your works were rotten, he certainly isn't going to flunk you because your faith isn't so hot. You can fail utterly and therefore still live a life of grace. You can fold up spiritually, morally, and intellectually and still be safe, because at the very worst, all you can be is dead. And for him who is the resurrection and the life, that just makes you his cup of tea. It's always been about faith and trust. That's why when God invites us into a relationship with him, we spend the rest of our life, as Capon says, saying thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And getting to know him. And the more I get to know him, the more I love him. And the more I love him, the more I'm able to trust him. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Trust gets stronger and more confident the longer I walk with him, because I've gotten to know him. And I find out he is totally trustworthy in every way, because he's totally, absolutely perfect as love. For all that we've said this morning, Father, may you take what is needed for each one of us individually and apply it. Thank you that from the very beginning, it's always been about faith. And next week, when we look at the purpose of why you gave the law, we're going to find that discovery that's just beyond our wildest dreams. Help us to trust you with our falls. Places in our life that sometimes we look at and remember and we feel so much shame and guilt, remorse about. Places the enemy sometimes still likes to club us over the top of the head with it. Help us to trust the fact that you don't remember it. It's gone, forever obliterated in the ocean of your grace and love. Never to be remembered against us ever again. May we get to know you so we can love you and learn to trust you. In Jesus' name.